Hello and welcome everybody. Today I have a flip, but not of the Spellbinders Club kits. I am actually flipping the Not Too Shabby box of the month. And the reason why I'm flipping the box of the month is because I actually, at the time that I'm recording this, do not have the February club kits in my hands. And so I want to make sure that I have a flip video ready for the first of the month. And I decided let's flip the Not Too Shabby box. So I'll be making, as per usual, one flat, one layered, one interactive, and one pop-up card. Because these videos do tend to be long, I'll put a timestamp, so if there's one card in particular that you want to see me make, you can just pop straight to that card. And without further ado, let's make these. Okay, so we're gonna start with my flat card, and I am not too sure if I've ever done a clean and simple card like this before, but what I thought I would do is a bit of watercoloring. So I have some watercolor paper here, and I'm going to stamp out, this is from the Farmer's Market 4x6 stamp set. It's one of 3 stamp sets that comes in the Not Too Shabby box of the month. And I stamped it out with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is water resistant. It's a nice pigment ink that is oil-based, and so those lines shouldn't move. And the watercolors that I'll be using are my Distress Oxide watercolor pencils, which I don't use enough. I really do feel like I should pull these out to use more. The color pencils that I'm used to using, or watercolor pencils I'm used to using, are the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer ones, which I really like because they're like a color pencil with a fine tip. And how I generally use those is I'll kind of scribble in onto the watercolor paper with the pencil, and then use a water brush to move it and get that pigment to dissolve and move across and kind of fill in the image. But these watercolor pencils they're fat. They're more like crayons, so you really can't, well, you could, I suppose, but not with an image that has a lot of fine detail like this. I don't think that you would necessarily go direct to paper with these watercolor pencils, which I feel like are more crayon size and shape than they are pencil. So what I'm doing is with a paintbrush, watercolor paintbrush, I'm wetting that and then swiping across the tip of the pencil to pick up the pigment. What's challenging with that, if you're going to do this, is just be aware that you don't waterlog your pencil too much, because at some point, if you swipe across, the same section of your pencil, it's going to have more water that absorbs into that and softens that. And so then, at some point, you might end up picking up more pigment than, because it's softer and is a little bit more dissolved already in water. So you might end up picking up more pigment than you expect. So it's definitely something different that I had to kind of get used to. But I really love these colors, and I don't have all, I think there's 16 sets. I don't have all 16. I have 3. And I find that it's a really nice range. Actually, what I really like about how the different sets have been designed is that I think you get a little bit of the rainbow in each of the 6 sets, so that you don't feel like you have to pick up all 6 if you want the full rainbow of colors. Some sets might have, more blues versus more reds and whatnot, but I think all of them actually do have a fairly good mix of colors across the spectrum. So even if you had one, then you could maybe mix some other colors in to get some different shades and different hues. But they're fun. They're very pigmented. They're really easy to work with, and I like it a lot. I had a lot of fun doing this. It took a while. I'm pretty slow at coloring, but I do like the end result. And what I'm gonna do is to finish the whole thing. I I kind of want to make it look like a little watercolor painted page in, say, like a children's book, for example. And part of the inspiration was some of the ephemera pieces kind of feel like they have a very watercolor effect, because the box of the month does come with two 6x6 paper pads, and each of the paper pads also has a coordinating set of ephemera. So as I was looking at the ephemera, this was actually the second card I made. So I was already playing with the ephemera pieces, and I really like this watercolor effect. So I'm just sort of doing a very loose, grassy, little area here for our farmer's market stand, and just trying to give it that very organic feel, but also to ground this image so that it looks like it's actually part of a scene as opposed to just a farmer's stand floating on a card. So I'm going to do the same thing and have a bit of a sky. I didn't really think about doing this in advance because I might have picked a different color for the wood at the top of the stand. I didn't think that I would do the sky, and so now I've got like two blues up against each other. But I guess that's okay. I wanted to put some blue in here because of the some of the inspiration that I was taking from the paper pad and from the various bits of ephemera. There's a really lovely blue truck ephemera piece that I was trying to kind of go for because I just thought the color palette looked really nice. And so I thought, oh, it would be kind of interesting to have the roof of the stand have like that washboard kind of painted look to it. In retrospect, maybe I would have kept that brown just so that the blue sky looks good against it, but I'm still happy with it. And what I'm going to do is put it right back into my Misty and do some overstamping. So I'm going to stamp this again to freshen up those lines, because the ink, the lines of the image, they didn't move at all, but they were painted over. And so by just overstamping, it helps to redefine all of those lines and crisp up the image again. And so that's why I made sure to leave the stamp in my Misty. That way I could put it right back in that same location and not only overstamp the image, but then also stamp the sentiment. So this is going to finish my flat card. It's pretty, I think, clean and simple. I didn't even add a matte layer to frame this panel, so kept it super clean and simple, a very flat, easy mailer. Now on to my layered card. So here I've got the On the Farm 6x6 paper pad. I'm going to do a quick shuffle through this just to see what options I have to work with here. And so you'll get to see all of the 12 designs. These are double-sided, so it's really great. You can just flip to the back and you'll have an easy coordinating paper to match with the design on the other side. So really, really love that. Lots of different patterns, lots of different textures. And I do love that we get a nice mix of like florals and plaids and, wood. And there's even that one that has some landscaping and a sort of a seascape with the little duckies. So there's a pretty wide range of imagery and really, really lovely. So I've pulled in my Easy Wonder die. This is die number 1. And I'm going to cut. So I typically like to die cut my, if I'm going to die cut the full Easy Wonder die, I like to cut into something that's non-directional. That way the pieces can, I can choose to orient them however I need on my card. It just gives me a little bit more flexibility with how to use all of these pieces. as well, I do feel like a lot of times, just depending on the size of the print, because larger prints, I feel the design gets a little bit lost on some of the smaller banner pieces. So that's the other reason why I like to use something that not only is non-directional, but is more of a pattern or solid. So this sort of watercolor pattern I thought would be great because it's a nice accent. I can use all of the pieces in one way or another, and it'll be super easy to use those pieces on future cards. For this card, I am going to use the long strip, and I really, especially with a color as striking as red, I really feel like it's nice and to use sparingly. So I love how the pattern paper has been designed because there's just pops of red in that field of tulips. And I thought bringing in this watercolor panel would be really great. But I want to tone it down a little bit by bringing in some of that. It's like a buttercream kind of yellow color, which is the other color of tulip in the pattern paper. It just so happens, though, that the oval I cut out of Easy Wonder Die number 2, and it's actually a pattern paper from a different paper pad, but it's like the closest match that I could find out of even my solid color cardstock, and so it worked out really well. And it was a bit of scrap that I had left over from a different card, so I love that. So it does tie all of those colors in from that tulip pattern to the front, and then you can kind of see the pieces of ephemera that I have off to the side, and there's that blue truck that I was inspired by in my first card. This was the first card I made in terms of the order that I actually created these cards in, and so that's why I had that sort of watercolor look in mind as I was making my flat card, because if you look at the ephemera, it does have that very watercolor soft feel to it. So I'm just going to use this oval as a bit of a foundation, a bit of a stage to collage up my ephemera pieces. And I thought I would use this. This is a I'm just trying out a lot of different stamp positioning tools. So this is the Precision Press by We Are Makers. It's their mini one, and it actually came with another tool that I bought from We Are Makers. So I don't know if this one sells on its own separately, because I know that they have a larger version of this stamping platform, but this small mini one is kind of convenient for just these little sentiments, like just a quick little sentiment. And my latest tool that I am in love with is the Misty. This is their cut a line ruler, which I really love. It's for this purpose. I don't know what other uses it's advertised for, but I love it for this purpose. And that is so that you can cut these really small banner pieces and have equal like border all the way around. I can't really easily do this in the many different trimmers that I have and guillotines that I have, but this ruler is what let me kind of cut that really thin margin top and bottom. The sentiment that I'm using, it's actually, that one is actually from one of the 3 stamp sets that comes included in the box of the month, but it's from a different stamp set. So this one is from the From Our Barn stamp set, whereas the image from the first card, that was from the Farmer's Market stamp set. So the box of the month, I think it might be sold out. It generally is a fast one to sell out. So I don't know if there's sign up available for it, but I'll leave links to everything in the description box below if you want to check it out for yourself. Some of the things like the paper pad and ephemera, you might be able to purchase a la carte. And if you do have the box, you can usually get the coordinating dies separately as well. They don't come included in your subscription box if you've signed up to subscribe to get this on a monthly basis, but they are generally available for purchase if you want. Now we're into my interactive card. So I've used another element from the original Easy Wonder die cutout that I cut initially. And I'm going to use the square that has the circle aperture cut through it and make a shaker card. And so I generally, I don't typically do shaker cards for my interactive card. I'm not sure why, but I do love a good shaker. So that's what I'm gonna do for this one. And the way that I like to make my shakers is I do like to use 2 pieces of acetate and have it fully assembled as an element. And then I'll just place it on my card afterwards. So the foam that I'm using, this is kind of overkill for a shaker, but I'm using the Barely Art cubies. These are, so when you get these, they come in 2 different thicknesses and in 2 different like form factors, I guess. So the first thickness is 1/8 of an inch and the second thickness is 1/4 of an inch. I'm using 1/4 of an inch, which is kind of overkill because I'm using fairly flat, because these are just sequins. They're pretty flat. So I don't really think I needed this to be 1/4 of an inch, but if you do buy these foam strips, then you do have the 2 as options. So 1/4 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch. And then you also get them in 2 different form factors. You get them as strips, like I'm using here, but you also get them as squares, like cut into squares. So it's kind of nice. You kind of have the option for how you want to use it. The strips are really easy because as you can see, I was able to bend it around that circle aperture. And that's what you want. You want to kind of hug your aperture as closely as possible so that as much as possible, whatever you're filling your shaker with is going to be visible through the aperture. Because if I just put adhesive around the 4 edges, when that card gets tilted, some portion of the shaker bits are going to be behind that open aperture and you're not going to even see them. So you're going to have to like kind of fill with more shaker bits in order for it to be visible. So that's why I like to try to hug that aperture as closely as possible. And I did use a couple of Love from Lizzie pinstripe stickers to add as a bit of an accent. I love this cow print. It's also from the On the Farm paper pad. Really, really lovely. And it just kind of adds a little extra, drama to this card. And so that's why I went with the black and white shaker bits, the sort of overall black and white, pretty much everything except for the frame is going to be black and white. So there's that very striking pop of red. And then everything else is kind of themed around this cow. And one of the reasons why I wanted this theme for this card is because of this sentiment. It says, "You're utterly amazing," which I thought was awesome and really funny. So sometimes, what decides the card for me is like the sentiment, which was what the case was for this card. Sometimes it's the mechanism, like just the concept of an idea that I have, and that's sort of what led the thinking behind my pop-up card, which you'll see after this one. But for sure, this sentiment, "You're utterly amazing. It just tickled me for some reason, and that's really how this particular card evolved. I just wanted to have all things cow, and gathered up all the things and went with it from there. So I brought out my cut a line tool, which, as I mentioned, I'm just really loving. And so I've got that. And you could definitely use a die if you had a die. But I kind of feel like for these thin little strips, it wasn't that hard actually to use this ruler. And I thought it would be kind of tricky to use. Because you know how sometimes, like in concept, when you're reading a product listing, you kind of think, or even watching a video of somebody else doing it, you kind of think, oh, that looks like it would be useful or helpful or easy to use. And then in practice, it ends up being not as easy as it might have appeared to be based on watching other people do it. But this actually wasn't that hard. I was more worried about whether I could line up the lines and see all of the lines. I think that's the trickiest part, because there are so many lines on this ruler. And so that, to me, is the trickiest part about this, is making sure that you are lining things up against the same line. And once you kind of get used to it, then it's not too bad. And I was also a little, and I still am, so we'll see like how it holds up over time. But I am a little bit worried that that slot in the middle where you're supposed to cut, it's not like reinforced with metal or anything. It's still just plastic. So you could accidentally kind of gouge into or cut into that plastic. But we'll see how I'll continue to use it, and I'll see how it holds up over time. But so far, I'm really loving it. So my last card is going to be my pop-up card, and I'm going to have already selected what I want for the inside of my card. I've got this really rustic kind of wood grain pattern paper. It's from the second paper pad. So it's from the Fresh and Fabulous paper pad. And I like this one because it doesn't have the red tones to it, which on the farm paper pad, it does have one that a pattern paper that has some wood planks as well, but that one has a more reddish tinge to it, and I just didn't think against the blue sky that it would look as good as this one, so that's why I went with this one. I really love having like wood grain pattern papers. It's especially this one, it's very rich and dark, which I thought was a really nice contrast against the blue, which I think the blue is meant to be more water effect, but I'm using it for the sky. So these pieces are going to be the pop-up elements on the inside of the card. I've got my mini scoreboard here, and I cut this piece to 3.25 tall by 5.5 wide, and I scored it at 1/4 inch, and then I scored at 1.75, and then I scored at 2.75. So this started at 3 inches. I think I might have said 3.25 earlier, but I think it started at 3. And so I've just got, because I want to conserve this pattern paper, I didn't want to make this, because you just need about 1/4 inch as a glue tab just to get everything kind of well stuck down. So the 1/4 inch on both sides is meant to be the glue tabs. And then I wanted to make this sort of like a table, like a farmer's stand or bench or whatever. And so I gave myself 1.5 inches. And so this little pop-up stand is going to stick out 1.5 inches from the back of the card. And then when it pops up, it's going to be 1 inch tall. So that's how I arrived at those particular measurements. So I scored it. So again, the piece is 3 inches tall by 5.5 wide. And I scored it at 1/4 of an inch, 1 3/4 of an inch, 2 3/4 of an inch. And then I just mountain folded everything. So before I actually put my inside of the card together with the pop-up mechanism, I do want to decorate the outside of the card first, because then I can assemble and burnish everything nice and aggressively, as I so often like to do, while the card itself is still relatively flat and there's not, a lot of stuff on the inside of the card. So I've just chosen a sentiment. This is from the 3rd stamp set that's in the box of the month, and it's called Farm Life. Love this. I really love this stamp set because it's, I think, mostly all. Let me think. Yeah. All but one stamp is some form of a sentiment. So I really, really love that. And in particular, I love that there are a lot of like silhouette graphical images mixed in with the typography. And so I think that just makes it feel like these sentiments can really stand, on their own as a focal image. And you don't even have to like add some ephemera, or you don't have to stamp and color an image. I kind of feel like some of these especially are large enough. And because they kind of have some imagery, some graphical elements mixed in, I feel like they make nice statement pieces and great for your focal image on its own. So I'm going to keep the front of my card really simple in terms of using this by itself as the sentiment, but I am adding some pattern paper. So I cut up some more of the wood plank that was left over. I've got 1/2 inch strip at the top and the bottom, and then I just picked another pattern paper from the Fresh and Fabulous pattern paper pad, and I have that through the center. And then finally I've got my sentiment here, but I kind of feel like I need for that sentiment to stand out a little bit. So I thought that I might use some more of that wood grain paper to add as a frame or a matte layer behind this sentiment, but I just didn't want to waste it, to be honest, because most of it's going to get hidden. And so I thought, well, I'll just use some kind of solid color cardstock, and I couldn't find, I'm very low on like my browns in terms of neutral papers. And so what I was able to find in my stash was some craft color cardstock. So that's what I'm going to use to frame up this sentiment. And that will complete the front of the card. Now, where all of the action of this card will be is on the inside with the pop-up. And so once I get this glued on, it's going to finish up the front. And the front's going to be, a little bit multi-layered, but it's going to be a lot more flat than what the inside of this card will ultimately be. So I've got my sky glued down first, and that's going to be on the upper portion of the inside. And this platform is going to be our pop-up. Now, if you were thinking ahead, I would suggest doing this in a different order. What you're going to see me do is glue this in first, and I made it work just fine, but I think it made it a little bit trickier to do some of the following steps. Ultimately, you want it to look like this. And normally when I make a pop-up mechanism, I have the glue tabs going all the way to the fold of the card, but I didn't want to do that because I'm using pattern paper and I wanted to conserve pattern paper. So that's why I did it this way. Otherwise, if you were just using plain cardstock, or if you didn't care about conserving your pattern paper, you could score this at 1 inch, measure 1.5 inches from that, score again, measure 1 inch from that score line, and then cut it an inch and a half away. Normally that's how I would make a standard pop-up, but I just wanted to save on pattern paper, to be honest. So now I've got this kind of like a table of sorts, and what I want to do is arrange some of these lovely ephemera pieces from the coordinating ephemera pack that goes with the Fresh and Fabulous paper pad. And I'm just going to kind of assemble them and lay them out, so to speak, on this table. And I thought that the white border around the ephemera pieces kind of, I thought maybe I could just get away with just cutting the bottom because it makes it feel like it's not really on the table when you have that white border. So what I started to do was just cut away the white border on the bottom of the ephemera, thinking, okay, that's going to make it feel like it sits on the table more because then you don't have that white border across between the element and the table. But then it kind of looked weird that there was still a white border everywhere else. So I turned the cramer off and fussy cut all of those ephemera pieces. So now what I'm going to do, and here's where I was starting to say that if you were planning this in advance, I would maybe cut this part first. I'm going to cut some slits through this section. This is the 1.5 inch section that is perpendicular to the back of the card, the tabletop essentially. And I'm just going to cut slits that are about 1/2 inch wide. And I put some scrap paper underneath this as I was cutting it so that I didn't cut through my card base. Because you don't want to cut into your card base. You just want to cut through the pattern paper in my case here. And then I'll just make some pop-up stands. So these are just 1/4 inch wide, and I just folded, I didn't even score, I just folded about another 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch or so glue tab at the bottom. And then you just stick the stand up through that slot. And so now you have something that you can glue your ephemera to. And when this pops up, that will pop up as well. And then you can add a lot of dimension, a lot of items to this table, because what I'm going to do, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this section 1.5 inches, so that I would have, you know, a pretty wide table, or like I guess that's the depth of the table to play with. So for example, this slot, I'm going to cut a little bit closer to the front edge of the table. And then I'm going to add a third slot that's a little bit on the more towards the back. And I'm actually cutting my slots on the lines of that kind of define each plank of wood. And so that kind of hides it a little bit because I'm cutting it where there's like naturally a seam anyways, but it's not like you would see that. But it just gives me an idea for like these different planes, right? So now we have like a background, a midground. So there's going to be some things that can sit behind other things, and it just helps you to kind of build up your scene so that it doesn't feel so, you know, two-dimensional, which is the whole idea behind a pop-up. Now, the other way that you can kind of, what I did was I just slotted these pop-up stands through, but I had to find a way to get adhesive onto those little glue tabs. So I just put some liquid glue onto some scrap paper, and I just sort of, you'll see me do it again. So I just go in, slide that in, and then just rub it against or slide it against or swipe it against the glue tab. So it's a little tricky. If you plan this in advance, you could get those slots cut. You could get your pop-up stands, you know, already, you know, slotted through. But whatever order you approach it, you're going to be able to find a way to get it to work. Some of these mechanisms are a little bit finicky, so it just takes sort of giving yourself enough room. So you could make this like 2 inches wide if you wanted, and that gives you a little bit more space underneath the table to work with. And so I'm just going to continue to decorate. So I found this ephemera piece, which is really nice. It's kind of like a wall hanging that says Farmer's Market. And I have some additional elements. So the other thing is like that sign, I've just glued that directly on the back of the card, which initially I was thinking would be open sky. But, there's a sign hanging there, and it kind of doesn't make sense that it's hanging in midair. But all the same, I just like having it back there because now if you look at it, there's, the sky is one dimension or one plane, and then you've got the table has 2 additional planes, in terms of, just looking at where your elements are. And then I'm going to add an additional pop-up stand. And I made this just very similar to how I made the wood one. So just decided how far away from the table and how far up from the floor I wanted this little stand to be. And then I just added a 1/4 inch glue tab on either end. So just added like an extra little pop-up stand, and that way now I can put something that's in front of this little table that I've created here. And so I thought having that little crate would be really fun. And you can continue to do that. So once you have one pop-up mechanism in place, you can use that and attach additional pop-up mechanisms just like I did for the crate. And then you can determine, how far forward you want something to be in your scene or how close you want it to be to those previous other planes. So for instance, that little basket of veggies, I just glued that directly to the table without a pop-up. So here's a final look at all of the cards that I created. So this is my flat card that features the stamp that comes in the box of the month. This is the Farmer's Market stamp. Then onto my layered card where I feature the On the Farm 6x6 paper pad with coordinating ephemera pack, and the sentiment comes from the From Our Barn 4x6 stamp set. My interactive card is a shaker card, which also features paper and ephemera from On the Farm. And the sentiment, again, is also from Our Barn. That stamp set has a mix of both sentiments and images, so that one's really nice as well. And then this is my pop-up card, and it has a sentiment from the Farm Life stamp set. And on the inside, it has papers from the sky that I'm using is from On the Farm. And then the table and all of the ephemera is from the Fresh and Fabulous 6x6 paper pad and the coordinating ephemera pack. So I'll leave links to everything in the description box below. I hope you don't mind that I changed up the products that I'm using for my flip video. I will still have a flip of the Spellbinders Club kits that will just have to be on a later day once I actually get the February club kits in hand to craft with. Thanks so much, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye.